picture, if you will, the snug seclusion of a candle-lit study at Gaylord College, Oxbridge, on a stormy night in late December, almost 100 years ago, where Oxbridge academic and confirmed bachelor, the Reverend Professor Dr. Montgomery Mablethorpe Zoomer, is seated on a Chesterfield wing-back chair before a roaring log fire to share the ritual of ghost stories over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop with his coterie of young, fresh-faced student acolytes. Setting aside his cup of steaming punch, he opens the dusty tome that rests upon his knees and begins to read in a mellifluous voice.
The Haunting of Bell End by J.R. Dullard, a Victorian ghost story of sorts in the oral tradition, as read by Sir Christopher Lurch.
Bell End House, ill-starred from the first, seated on the edge of a precipice, holding within it and without the portent of doom. It had stood firm and erect for 400 years, but it was now a question as to whether it would survive a further 400 days, if not 400 hours. As sturdy and substantial as it had ever been in its construction, the bricks and mortar were little defence from the threat that held it in its grip. Phyllis Muff, despite her remarkable beauty, was, at 22 years, fast living in fear of becoming an old maid when she first laid fateful eyes upon the advertisement in the Matrimonial Herald. It read, Matrimony. A private gentleman aged 34, entirely independent, whose endowment is not to be exceeded, has lately lost the shining star in his firmament by the cruel hand of Providence, under circumstances too disagreeable to relate. To any female of respectability who would study for domestic comfort and willing to dedicate her future happiness to the care of his two dear motherless children, and to one who is in every way qualified to render the marriage state desirable. The respondent need not have the power of wealth or property as the advertiser is in affluence, but must simply be of character and refinement beyond question and pleasing to behold. Many joyous betrothals have taken place through means similar to this now resorted to, and it is hoped no one will answer this with nefarious intentions. But should this meet the eye of an agreeable lady, who feels desirous of meeting with a sociable, tender, kind, and sympathizing companion, they will find this advertisement worthy of notice. Honour and the utmost discretion may be relied on. As some little security against all applications, it is requested that letters may be addressed, post-paid, to FNS, care of Mr. Bunghole, stationer, number 69 Quality Street, which will meet with the most respectful attention. The advertisement struck Phyllis as a thunderbolt might. She came from middle-class gentility. Her father, having lost his marbles, and with them the family fortune, had ended up in a pauper's grave, forcing her, a dowerless girl, into service as governess to a series of intemperate employers and their ill-conceived brats. Her latest appointment was proving untenable. So strange and unreasonable were the demands of the perverse couple she currently served, that she leapt at this slim chance of deliverance and replied post-haste. Phyllis, in short, would have gone anywhere, done anything to escape her deplorable and lonely estate. And so it was that, within a month, in a small, quiet ceremony in her local parish church, the spinster, Miss Phyllis Muff of Kensington, became the wife of the Honourable Mr. Franklin Nathaniel Stein of Cornwall on the 16th of December, 1893. And it was with a deep sigh of relief that, once and for all, she discarded the disgraced surname of Muff and embraced a future as the Honourable, by association, Mrs. Phyllis Stein. Any thought of a honeymoon had to be put on hold, as Franklin expressed the need to return to the pressing demands of his Cornwall estate and beloved children. Phyllis did not complain. She was simply happy to leave London and its thick yellow fog for the promise of fresh air and open spaces. Indeed, she was also most keen to meet the dear darlings that a doting Franklin had expressed such deep fondness for. They boarded the Cornishman at London Paddington and occupied a first-class sleeping berth for the 8 hour and 35-minute, 325.25 journey overnight trip to Penzance. No sooner had the door been locked behind them and the blinds drawn than Franklin took full advantage of his matrimonial license. He proved himself a passionate and gymnastic, though attentive lover who acted as if he had been starved of female company for years, not months. Phyllis had never known a man in the biblical sense, but as she drifted in and out of delirium for the next 8 hours, grasping a moment's respite when allowed, she was not complaining at her athletic induction into the ways of conjugal love. Franklin cut a fine figure, 6'6" of toned muscularity and all deliciously in proportion, handsome with brown hair, a full beard, blue eyes and a devilish smile. He was, Phyllis assured herself, quite a catch. She found herself a fortunate, if thoroughly exhausted girl. Arriving at Penzance, Franklin's coach and coachman were dutifully awaiting to convey them on the 9-mile journey to Bell End. But it was on that journey that the first dark shadows were cast upon Phyllis's newfound happiness. Franklin took to educating his young wife as she peered out of the coach window at the bleak and unfamiliar winter landscape as it sped past. Cornwall, he informed her, is a peninsula bordered to the north and west by the Celtic Sea, to the south by the English Channel, and to the east by the county of Devon over the River Tamar. It is the westernmost part of the southwest peninsula of the island of Great Britain, and the ancestral family seat of Bell End lay at its southwesternmost tip. But darling, you begin to sound like a travelogue, she laughed gaily. You would do well to mind your manners and show some respect, he responded coldly. It is necessary to know what awaits you. Phyllis gasped, stung by his cruel tone. But, dear heart, I meant no offence. Franklin sniffed. Pray don't look at me so unkindly. Do tell me what awaits, she pleaded. The harsh gleam in his eyes quickly faded, and he took her gloved hand in his. Forewarned is forearmed, my dear, and I just want to prepare you for any eventuality, he cooed. The ancestral home has stood upon that very same spot for over 400 years, but in recent times the land that surrounds it has eroded into the sea. The local village has been abandoned as a consequence, and Bell End is now set quite a distance apart from its nearest neighbours. There is no need to worry your pretty little head, as the threat is not immediate, he lied convincingly. But I am making preparations. The west wing has already been dismantled and moved further inland. I will continue to supervise the rest of the relocation upon our return, though you may need to get used to living amidst a noisy deconstruction site for the time being. I trust you will not be too inconvenienced prior to the move. Whither thou goest, I will go, Phyllis replied obediently, and as the tang of salt sea air grew even stronger, she spent the remainder of the journey in a quiet contemplation of what fate might actually hold in store at journey's end. The Tudor manor, with later additions known as Bell End House, swooped out of a dense sea mist like a serene, though injured, grey and white gull on the lookout for fish and chips. It comprised a main south-facing range abutting an easterly block, consisting of a tower house with low northerly range, with a 2-story building to the east of the tower. It would have looked quite lovely had it not been for the obvious removal of the west wing, which was as evident as any limb torn from its socket. As they drew up to the frontage of the family seat, framed in the portico, Phyllis spied a stout older woman holding the hands of 2 small children, a boy of 7 years and a girl of 6, who broke free and ran down the steps to meet their father as he emerged from the coast, with gleeful cries of "Daddy, Daddy!" With one arm thrown around each waist, Franklin swept both up and was met by arms around his neck and his face covered with affectionate kisses. "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, we missed you so much," said the boy. "Say you will never go away again," cried the younger girl. Franklin turned to Phyllis. Indicating the girl, he said with a beaming smile, "May I introduce you to my little princess? This is Rosetta." Then indicating the boy, "And this is my little prince Roland, and this, dear children, is your new mamma." His offspring raised their little heads from his neck and fixed her with the same cold, cruel eye she had experienced earlier in the coach that day. It appeared to be a family trait. "She isn't as pretty as our own mamma," observed Roland, looking to his sister for confirmation. "No," Rosetta agreed. "I don't think I will like her very much." "Children, children," Franklin laughed. "No one in this whole wide world could ever compare with your own dear mamma, but this lady will have to do." And with a wink that failed to placate a mortified Phyllis, Franklin led the way up the steps. Mrs. Gubbins, the housekeeper, a jolly, matronly figure, welcomed her master at the door with the warmest of smiles, which was further extended to Phyllis herself. She was clearly more than a paid attendant, more of a family friend. "Good to have you back, sir," she declared. "Good to be back, Mrs. G. The servants are all gathered inside to greet their new mistress, sir, just as you instructed." "Then, if you'll do the honours, Mrs. Gubbins," and they passed into the entrance hall. The children were set down and sent off to play, while Mrs. Gubbins led Phyllis in the introduction down the long line of household staff: the butler, the cook, the gentleman's valet, the coachman, the governess, the lady's maid and 9 other types of maids, the footman, the houseman, the groundsman, the hall boy, the boot boy, the page, the seamstress, the head gardener, the stable master, the gamekeeper, groundskeeper, stable hands, gamekeepers, and handyman. Phyllis's head was spinning by the end of it all, and, feeling sure she would never remember all their names, inquired of Mrs. Gubbins sotto voce if they might not wear a badge. Mrs. Gubbins assured her kindly that the names would register in time, but in the meantime she had provided her with a list to memorize that she would find on her dresser upstairs. Introductions over, the retinue were dismissed, save for the valet, Tobias Bodkins, and houseman Oscar Purvis, who carried her trunk up the double stairway to her room, which lay off the gallery that encircled the main hall. The lady's maid, Euphemia, was also retained and instructed to take her new mistress up to her chambers. Franklin made his excuses in order to attend to business, and left Phyllis to amuse herself for a few hours. They would meet again at dinner, he assured her, with a kiss upon her dainty hand. At the entrance to her boudoir, Phyllis clapped her hands and rushed towards a pile of beautifully wrapped gifts that were stacked inside the doorway, each with a tag bearing a note in a beautiful copper-plate hand. "For my dearest darling," read one. "Thank you for making me the happiest man in the land," read another. "How thoughtful my dear, dear husband is," gushed Phyllis. "Indeed he is, ma'am," replied Effie. "He was very fond of the former mistress. I apologize that these tokens of his undying affection for her were not removed before your arrival," and she made to gather up an armful. A crestfallen Phyllis felt hot tears spring to her eyes as she looked round the room in a vain attempt to disguise her crushing disappointment. This was her room, she asked, her voice quivering. Yes, Mum, but we have changed the bedding, Effie replied. The decor is very unique, Phyllis observed despondently. Why, yes, Ma'am, Effie agreed. Decorated to her specifications. The mistress was particularly fond of taxidermy, as you can see. The interior decoration was indeed distinctive. The flocked wallpaper was blood red and decorated with black fleur-de-lis. The furniture was dark, cumbersome and oppressive. Glass cabinets hung on the walls where paintings might have been expected, with a range of dead reptiles and rodents pictured in their natural habitats. She shivered reflexively. Will you help me unpack? She finally asked, resigned to her miserable surroundings. I wouldn't bother unpacking, Ma'am, Effie replied. I doubt you'll be here long enough to warrant the exertion. And with a smirk and a curt nod, Effie exited the room, leaving Phyllis to reflect upon her sorry circumstances in solitude. As a dark shadow crossed her heart, she stepped towards the bedroom window that looked out upon the rear of the house. The view that met her gaze was of long manicured lawn with orchards either side, their gloomy branches bare and stark. But the lawn itself appeared to come to an abrupt end, enveloped in sea mist. Curiosity getting the better of her, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and set off to examine the oddity. On the ground floor she found access through French windows in the sumptuous dining room and hurried towards the horizon, drawing the wrap tightly around herself. The sky was dark and overcast, and the salt sea spray seemed to sting her face as she approached her objective. The sound waves crashing somewhere beyond the mist grew louder, until, coming to an abrupt halt, she found herself teetering at the very edge of the world. The lawn fell away sharply, and peering down, her gaze fixed upon a sheer cliff face and the jagged rocks and tormented waves far below. Mind your step, came the shrill squeal behind her, and a ripple of childish laughter rang out. Startled, Phyllis stumbled forward, the heels of her ankle boots clawing for firm ground as it crumbled underfoot. She spun around in desperation, and it was only a sudden fortuitous gust of wind that thrust her back towards a safer footing. Roland and Rosetta stood grinning. They really were quite beautiful, if insolent, children. Both had tan complexions with big, wide, limpid brown eyes and a profusion of dark, almost black curls that fluttered in the breeze. You should be more careful, Roland admonished her. They say that's where our dear mamma plunged to her death upon the rocks below. But we know different, don't we? Rosetta giggled. You know different? Phyllis enquired with a forced smile. Oh, yes, of course, Roland replied patronizingly, with a glance at his sister's face as he took her tiny hand. She comes to us every night to tuck us up in bed, silly. And with this, the siblings turned and flew towards the house. The sound of their merriment carried on the wind like the harsh caw of carrion birds. Husband and wife dined that night by candlelight. Franklin was never more attentive or solicitous. He distracted her, charmed her, entranced her, held her in his spell. Once his appetite was sated, he dabbed the corners of his sensual mouth with a napkin, and taking hold of a candlestick, treated her to a tour of what he archly referred to as the Rogues' Gallery, the family portraits that lined the walls on the first floor. This, he said of the first portrait, is the architect of, and earliest known holder of, our humble abode, Uli von Hickelstein, 1462 to 1523, who anglicised the family name upon the accession of King Henry VII. He was appointed esquire of the body to the king, and attended to his body intimately and enthusiastically, by all counts. He passed along the gallery, giving brief biographical details, until he reached the last of the portraits, whence he hesitated. It was of a stunning beauty, one clearly of Latin extraction. And this, his voice quivered, was my late wife, Esmeralda de Rumpo. She was a great beauty. She was indeed, he sighed. We met in the saltpeter mines of Chile. Her father managed our family's interests. She was a woman obsessed. Obsessed with saltpeter? How odd. Didn't she get out much? Obsessed with me, he replied curtly. She was as fiery and passionate, as jealous and fixated as befitted her nature and her blood. She was quite the most exciting woman I have ever known. Phyllis's fragile ego shrank to Lilliputian proportions. But she is gone, and you are here now. It's time you were in bed. He kissed her lightly on the forehead. Will you not join me, she asked, her eyelids fluttering coquettishly. Saturday nights only from now on, I'm afraid. Star them in your calendar. Duty calls, and I need to keep my strength up if I am to supervise the relocation and attend to all the other business. I'm afraid you will need to amuse yourself the rest of the week, but doubtless Effie and Mrs. Gubbins can teach you a few tricks of the feminine trade. Short of imagination, she cast her eyes to the floor peevishly. But that is another 6 long, lonely nights and days. Don't look so downhearted, dearest. Come Saturday night, I will be all yours. But what about the days, she whined. Tomorrow, why not explore the house and the grounds, eh? You can go wherever you will, have any key to any door on the whole estate. Except the library, he added pointedly. Why not the library, she asked. Because it is my private domain, dearest. A man must have one area of privacy, and so I must insist you never, under any circumstances, disturb me there or enter in. He lifted her chin so that her lips met his. Now, off to bed with you. Sleep well, my love. And he left her to count down the days. But she didn't sleep well. Despite the fatigues of the day, she lay awake, wrestling with her thoughts and punching the lumps in the mattress. Had it not been for the thunder and lightning, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the bedroom window, she might not have been lulled into a slumber at all. But the sounds had strangely soothed her, and so, eventually, she nodded off. Only to be awoken some time later by the sound of insistent rapping on the door. She staggered out of bed, half asleep, smoothing her long, luxuriant tresses, in hope that Franklin had had a change of mind and was waiting on the other side of the door with his ardour extant. Alas, when she did open the door to peer out into the darkened gallery, neither he nor anyone else was in sight at first. But as her eyes accustomed themselves to the gloom, she saw a cat, a large, overly fed ginger tom. Its long, luxuriant fur bristled as it arched its back, fixed her with green, malevolent eyes, and hissed. Quickly closing the door, she could still hear the rapping continue unabated. Drowsy and disorientated, she realized it was, in fact, emanating from the bedroom window behind her. But how could it be? She was on the first floor. Whoever it was would need to be a stilt walker at the very least, and she had seen no sight of a circus troupe on the journey to Bell End. Nevertheless, she crossed to the window and listened intently. The storm had passed, but the knocking continued. She paused, instinct somehow preventing her from peering through the heavy velvet curtains. "Who is it?" she declared. "Phyllis Stein. Phyllis Stein, let me in at your window," came the guttural response, as if filtered through gravel. "Who's there? What do you want?" "It is I, Esmeralda," came the response, and with it a hideous laugh, followed by the unmistakable sound of fingernails scratching and screeching against glass. Go away, a distraught Phyllis cried. In reply, she heard the sound of clawing at the window frame and the violent rattling of the sash, as if someone was struggling desperately, manically, to force it open. Let me in, the gravel voice demanded. Not on your Nelly, Phyllis exclaimed as she sprang across the room and into bed, covering her head with a pillow, and waited for the rapping of knuckles and the scratching of nails to subside, as they eventually did an hour and a half later, some time after she had passed into unconsciousness through fear and exhaustion. Slept well, ma'am? Inquired Effie, placing a breakfast tray on the bedside before throwing back the curtains. That storm last night was a rum 'un and no mistake, but it cleared the air. Sky is as bright as a button this morn. Effie fell silent as she turned to see an ashen-faced Phyllis sitting bolt upright amidst a tangle of sheets. Was it a nightmare, ma'am? Yes, a nightmare, Phyllis replied, a hastily retrieved cup and saucer rattling in her hand. That's what it was, a nightmare, she slurped in a most unladylike fashion. You're looking very queer, ma'am, if you don't mind me saying. Can I get you anything? Yes, you can. I think your suggestion not to unpack was quite prescient, Effie. Get me another room, one without windows, if possible. Without windows, ma'am? Effie looked perplexed and thought for a moment. Well, there is a room that abuts the former west wing that had the window blocked up, but really, it's not in any ways as commodious as this. Then God help it, Phyllis screeched. I'll have it. A broom cupboard would be preferable to this gallery of horrors. Well, don't just stand there. Effie scurried from the room, the prospect of sharing news of the new mistress's crackpot demands being too good not to. Monday afternoon saw Phyllis sat at the harpsichord in the music room, tinkling the ivories in a vain attempt to distract herself. Her mind obsessed on the queer events of the night before and came to one conclusion. There could be but one explanation. Those malevolent children had been playing a prank. She didn't know how they had achieved their evil ends, but she was convinced of their guilt. Her conclusion was only reinforced by the discovery of a tripwire at the top of the staircase on Tuesday morning, followed on Wednesday by the carved stone urn that fell from the roof, barely missing her parasol as she took her morning constitutional. On both these occasions she had heard the unmistakable raucous sound of children's laughter, albeit at a safe distance. By Thursday she had concluded that there was to be but one thing for it. She simply had to win the children's affections if there was to be any chance of a future for her and Franklin. And she set to the task with renewed dedication. On Friday she found them in the garden, a play area that had been set aside, flanked by green, glistening walls of ivy. Both children seemed remarkably pleased to see her, and their dear, beautiful, guileless little faces turned to meet hers with eager smiles. Roland was at play with bat and ball, while Rosetta nursed a large ginger cat. The very same cat Phyllis had seen in the gallery not so many nights previously, but this time it seemed strangely subdued and regarded her with disinterest. Have you met Incubus? Rosetta enquired, stroking the cat's fur as it licked languidly at her front paw. Met? No, not so you've noticed, Phyllis replied dismissively. Would you like to play a game, children? A game, cried Roland, dropping his bat and ball. Rather. Oh, yes, let's play a game. Rosetta clapped her hands. Can we play Pussy on a Swing? Pussy on a swing, said Roland, leading Phyllis by the elbow to the garden swing. She had no sooner seated herself than Rosetta thrust Incubus under her arm and, with her free hand holding tight to a chain, both children began to push Phyllis from behind. Slowly at first, then with ever-increasing vigour until, despite her protestations, she found herself flying onwards and upwards, higher and higher, until the chain suddenly snapped, and losing her grip, she flung the cat unceremoniously into the air and found herself catapulted heavenwards with the greatest of ease for what seemed an eternity, only to land face first into the murk of the duck pond. The horrified children ran forward to check if the cat was all right, but, having landed on its feet, they were relieved to find it was none the worse for wear. Phyllis stood, battered and bruised, wet and dishevelled, and raised her dripping fists in impotent rage at the backs of the fast-disappearing children, as they skipped off to the scullery to get Incubus a soothing saucer of milk. The clatter of coach wheels on the drive brought Phyllis racing from her room and down the stairs, but she had barely reached the bottom step before the children barged past and ran into Franklin's open arms. "Oh, Daddy, Daddy," Rosetta cried. "Something awful has happened. Our new mamma broke our swing." "We begged her not to sit on it," Roland declared, "but she wouldn't listen, and then she swung higher and higher, until the chains broke, and she dived into the duck pond and almost drowned poor Incubus. Oh, Daddy, Daddy, she's a monster. Please send her away, please," Rosetta sobbed. Franklin looked up and his eyes widened. Phyllis had deliberately let the pond water, mud and guano dry on her body, to let her husband see firsthand the depths to which his precious children had sunk. But it backfired. She looked like a complete madwoman. Roland and Rosetta turned their faces towards her and smirked. Her mouth fell open in silent protest and her eyes pleaded for understanding, but in vain. Franklin fixed her with cold, clear eyes and, head held high, passed by her, carrying the children up to the nursery without a backwards glance. Friday night she dined alone. Saturday night came and went without Franklin making his promised appearance, and she cried herself into fits without a candle. Bitter tears soaked her feathered pillow. She slept fitfully thereafter, aware of a presence, a heavy weight upon her chest. Her breathing became laboured, so laboured that she awoke with a gasp to find herself eyeball to eyeball with Incubus, who had taken up residency on her bosom. She screamed, and he leapt off the bed, promptly escaping through the bedroom door that stood strangely ajar. It was not long past midnight when, with little chance of going back to sleep, she padded down to the kitchen to get a glass of hot milk to aid her slumbers. The saucepan had no sooner been set on the hob than Mrs. Gubbins appeared in nightcap and dressing gown from the direction of the servants' quarters. "Why, my dearie, could you not sleep?" she smiled in a motherly fashion. "Sit yourself down and let me do that for you." Phyllis seated herself at the kitchen table and relaxed somewhat as Mrs. Gubbins busied herself, getting a cup and saucer and watching the milk come up to the simmering point. Mrs. Gubbins had been the only resident of Bell End to show her any warmth or kindness since her arrival. Her husband, when not absent, was ever changeable. The children were little horrors, and the other servants merely muttered in some obscure, unfathomable, archaic Celtic language whenever they were within her earshot. "You look troubled, mistress. Why don't you tell old Mrs. Gubbins all about it?" Phyllis shivered as she felt Incubus brush his corpulent frame against her leg as he stealthily passed under the table unannounced. "Mrs. Gubbins, would you please be so kind as to put Incubus outside? I don't like speaking in front of that thing." "In front of the cat, ma'am," she answered, bemused. Phyllis nodded. Mrs. Gubbins shrugged, but did as she was bid. Once the back door to the kitchen was closed, Phyllis threw aside any reservation. "That cat is evil, Mrs. Gubbins." Mrs. Gubbins stumbled backwards. "Evil, ma'am?" "Yes, evil. And those dear, darling children, they are, I am very much afraid, possessed." Mrs. Gubbins stumbled forward. "Possessed, ma'am?" "Yes, and my good-for-nothing husband gets up to all sorts of iniquities behind his locked library doors." Mrs. Gubbins clutched at her chest and stumbled sideways. "Iniquities, ma'am?" "Oh, I know I must sound mad, Mrs. Gubbins, but please believe me, this house is cursed. No good will ever come of it." "Cursed, ma'am?" "Yes, Mrs. Gubbins, and will you please stop repeating everything I say? It's getting right on my Titus oats." "Titus oats, ma'am?" Phyllis grunted resignedly and gave it up as a bad job. "Good night, Mrs. Gubbins," she announced, draining the last dregs from her cup. "And please, not a word to anyone, I beseech you." With that, she turned and strode directly back up the wooden hill to Bedfordshire. "Not a word to anyone, ma'am," echoed its way up the stairwell behind her. Sunday was Christmas Eve, but the joy Phyllis normally felt at this festive time of year was profoundly compromised. It was a squally day, and the weather grew worse as the day progressed, with a southwesterly gale and snow falling heavily by noon. Phyllis was pacing the morning room when Effie announced Phyllis's first ever visitor. She was somewhat startled, but asked Effie to show them in. The figure that entered the room was a small, portly man in his mid-50s, with top hat, an impressive set of whiskers, a monocle, a supercilious smile, and carrying a Gladstone bag. "Felicitations of the seasons, Frau Stein," he announced with a clipped German accent. "Dr. Sigmund Quark, at your service." "I didn't request the services of a doctor," she replied curiously. "Ah, yes, but I am not any doctor. I am a doctor not of the body, but of the mind. Would you like to see my credentials?" "I beg your pardon?" "I have very large and impressive credentials." "I don't doubt it," she snorted, "but what is it to me? I'm a married woman." "Indeed, indeed, and it is your husband who requested this consultation." "Did he indeed?" "Yes, indeed." "And why would that be?" "Because he is so very fond of you and concerned about your mental state." "My mental state?" "Why, yes, very concerned. A concern made all the more profound thanks to the disclosures shared with him by your former employer." "I beg your pardon?" "Your father was, I understand, a lunatic, as was his father before him. Your mother a melancholic, your aunt an nymphomaniac, and your cousin," he shook his head wearily, "a socialist." Enraged, she shot him a fiery glance. "So my husband is concerned about my mental welfare, is he? Well, doctor, I am concerned about his." Dr. Quack took a notepad and pencil from his pocket. "Ah, it is good to get them out, Frau Stein. What are your concerns?" "Friday last I was drifting off to sleep when I was suddenly alarmed by the sounds of mortal combat that appeared to emanate from the floor below. My room is over the library, which is my husband's exclusive domain. I thought he was subject to an attack, and I quickly rushed to his aid. As I approached the door, I could hear all kinds of frightful groans and moans and thuds, but, as he had expressly forbade me ever to enter in, I naturally dropped to my knees and peered through the keyhole. Imagine my astonishment, Dr. Quack, to see my husband and his valet stark naked and engaged in what could only be described as a bout of Greco-Roman wrestling before the open fire in an otherwise darkened room. "And who won?" asked the doctor. "That is hardly the point." The doctor nodded. "Go on." What do you want me to say? I could hardly bear to watch for more than half an hour as their heavy, sweating, muscular bodies grappled in the firelight, their parts slapping up against each other in wild abandon and their laughter punctuating their otherwise ecstatic moans and groans. So what do you make of that, Herr Doctor? The doctor looked very grave as he opened his Gladstone and produced a box of pills. Do not be too concerned, Frau Stein. Your husband is a strong, healthy animal who, I suspect, merely needs an outlet for his excess vitality. He handed her the box. My advice? Take 2 at bedtime. I guarantee you will sleep through anything. He clasped his bag shut and turned to leave. I will see you again in the new year. Yes, and a Merry Christmas to all. Merry it was not. Phyllis and Franklin dined that 24th of December evening in silence. Please, Franklin, please won't you talk to me, she beseeched him. Franklin snorted his derision and took a gulp of after-dinner brandy. It was then the first tremor occurred. Almost imperceptibly felt at first. Then the cutlery began to rattle on their plates. The crystal pendants on the cranberry glass table decorations began to sway and clatter together. The paintings rattled on the walls and began to fall one by one as a cacophony of sound began to reverberate around them. They both ran to the window, throwing back the curtains, and looked out upon the back lawn. The luminosity of the full moon cast an eerie light over a snow-white blanket, pristine without a footprint, save for the one that was now gobbling it up incrementally as it forever collapsed into the unforgiving briny. Dear God, the children, Franklin exclaimed as he tossed Phyllis aside and hurried past her prostrate body into the main hall. She rose swiftly and followed in his wake, watching him rush up the stairs 2 at a time. The great hall was in turmoil. Servants ran hither and thither like headless chickens in utter confusion. Incubus appeared out of nowhere, screeching and mewing, only to be quickly silenced by the marble column that collapsed upon it, rendering it flat, squashed, spread-eagled and lifeless on the flagstone floor. Mrs. Gubbins appeared at her elbow and, grabbing her, cried, Save yourself, ma'am, save yourself. Phyllis dragged her eyes away from where Franklin had run and darted for the door. Just as she reached the forecourt, the house collapsed behind her into the raging, cold, dark sea, with a great wailing and moaning of bricks and mortar. The screams of the lost souls emanating from within resounded in her ears, but were quickly subsumed by the greedy, incessant roar of the waves. The violent tremors subsided, and Phyllis found herself once again on the edge of a precipice, looking down upon a rampant sea that had entirely engulfed any trace of Bell End House and its unfortunate occupants. You escaped, ma'am. Oh, I am relieved, came the not entirely convincing voice behind her back. Phyllis turned to see Mrs. Gubbins rush towards her with outstretched hands, clearly intent on pushing her over the edge into the abyss. As they wrestled in the moonlight, Phyllis saw the face behind the face. It was that of Esmeralda de Rumpo, her features unmistakable from the portrait, but twisted into a mask of such grotesquerie it would have turned a Gorgon to stone, with eyeballs that popped out of her head like engorged conker spat from a brazier. If I can't have him, no one will, screeched the possessed form of Mrs. Gubbins. In the instant, Franklin came to her rescue as she suddenly pictured one of his signature wrestling moves from the combat in the library, and, hooking a leg behind Mrs. Gubbins' calf to tip her off balance, with one last mighty effort, she hurled her over her shoulder and watched her fall down, down into the murky depths. Her horrific screams were swallowed up by the icy, unforgiving waves below. Phyllis trembled and gasped, overwhelmed by relief. She had survived, and what is more, it occurred to her, as sole survivor of the clan Stein, she was now likely to be both a very wealthy and independent woman. And so, upon reflection, her matrimonials had worked out, rather to her advantage.